But last time I did speak, we covered the first chapter of the book of Samuel and the first 11 verses of the second chapter. And in that, we talked about the tension between Hannah and Peninnah, Hannah's prayer for and the eventual blessing of a son, and their annual trips to Shiloh for worship and sacrifice. I mentioned how blessed Hannah was for having such a pious husband who insisted that they go on these annual trips. And in the remaining verses of chapter 2 here, we'll see part of why it was such an impressive quality in Elkanah that he would insist that they go on these trips year after year to Shiloh. So we'll pick up in 1 Samuel chapter 2, there in verse 12, and we'll read throughout the rest of the chapter. It says, "Now the sons of Eli were corrupt. They did not know the Lord. And the priest's custom with the people was that when any man offered a sacrifice, the priest's servant would come with a 3-pronged flesh hook in his hand while the meat was boiling. Then he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot, and the priest would take for himself all that the flesh hook brought up. So they did in Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Also, before they burned the fat, the priest's servant would come and say to the man who sacrificed, 'Give meat for roasting to the priest, for he will not take boiled meat from you, but raw.' And if the man said to him, 'They should really burn the fat first, then you may take as much as your heart desires,' he would then answer him, 'No, but you must give it now, and if not, I will take it by force.' Therefore the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, for men abhorred the offering of the Lord. But Samuel ministered before the Lord, even as a child, wearing a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, 'The Lord give you descendants from this woman for the loan that was given to the Lord.' Then they would go to their own home. And the Lord visited Hannah so that she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the child Samuel grew before the Lord. Now Eli was very old, and he heard everything his sons did to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who assembled at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So he said to them, 'Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil doings from all the people. No, my sons, for it is not a good report that I hear. You make the Lord's people transgress. If one man sins against another, God will judge him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who will intercede for him?' Nevertheless, they did not heed the voice of their father, because the Lord desired to kill them. And the child Samuel grew in stature and in favor both with the Lord and men. Then a man of God came to Eli and said to him, 'Thus says the Lord, did I not clearly reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt, in Pharaoh's house? Did I not choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon my altar, to burn incense, and to wear an ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all the offerings of the children of Israel made by fire? Why do you kick at my sacrifice and my offering, which I have commanded in my dwelling place, and honor your sons more than me, to make yourselves fat with the best of all the offerings of Israel my people?' Therefore the Lord God of Israel says, 'I said indeed that your house and the house of your father would walk before me forever. But now the Lord says, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days are coming that I will cut off your arm and the arm of your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house. And you will see an enemy in my dwelling place, despite all the good which God does for Israel, and there shall not be an old man in your house forever. But any of your men whom I do not cut off from my altar shall consume your eyes and grieve your heart, and all the descendants of your house shall die in the flower of their age. Now this shall be a sign to you that will come upon your 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas. In one day they shall die, both of them. Then I will raise up for myself a faithful priest, who shall do according to what is in my heart and in my mind. I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before my anointed forever. And it shall come to pass that every one who is left in your house will come and bow down to him for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, and say, Please put me in one of the priestly positions, that I may eat a piece of bread. And the first verse of chapter 3 says, Now the boy Samuel ministered to the Lord before Eli. So we noticed in the first chapter that the chief priest Eli had become desensitized to the antics of his 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, who were also priests there in Shiloh. Worship had become hardly recognizable there, so much so that it says that men abhorred the offering of the Lord. And customarily, the priests were allotted the breast with the fat and the right leg or the thigh of the animal that was being sacrificed. And we find that in Leviticus 7, verses 28 through 36, where it says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, He who offers the sacrifice of his peace offering to the Lord shall bring his offering to the Lord from the sacrifice of his peace offering. His own hand shall bring the offering made by fire to the Lord. The fat with the beast breast he shall bring, that the breast may be waved as a wave offering before the Lord. And the priest shall burn the fat on the altar, but the breast shall be Aaron's and his sons'. Also, the right thigh you shall give to the priest as a heave offering from the sacrifice of your peace offerings. He among the sons of Aaron, who offers the blood of the peace offering and the fat, shall have the right thigh for his part. For the breast of the wave offering and the thigh of their heave offering I have taken from the children of Israel, from the sacrifices of their peace offerings, and I have given them to Aaron the priest and to his sons for the children of Israel, by a statute forever. But, as we clearly see, Hophni and Phinehas no longer hold to these laws that were set forth by God himself. Instead, they'd send their servant out to all the Israelites who came there to, and he would jab his flesh hook into the pot that they were cooking their meal in. Then he would make off with whatever meat that was pulled out on the fork. And if anyone showed any hint of resistance or correction of that servant, saying that, you should really burn the fat first, he would then threaten to take it by force. And not only this, but he would take extra raw meat for them to roast and eat themselves. So Hophni and Phinehas so clearly corrupted and perverted the sacrificial customs. But this was only half of what the scriptures note about their transgressions. And I suspect, given the nature of what the scriptures do mention, that they were guilty of much more. But they do mention that the sons of Eli were sleeping with the women who gathered at the door of the tabernacle. And this was no secret. Eli had heard the reports from others, presumably the locals or those who had traveled there for worship. Their sins were well known. Hannah's prayer from chapter 1 had just referenced the arrogant, whose actions will be weighed by the Lord, who is the God of all knowledge, the mighty, whose bows would be broken, the wicked, who shall be silent in darkness, and those who are adversaries of God, who would be broken in pieces. And here they are. None of this would come as such a surprise if we were talking about any normal couple of people. Yet it is surprising because we're not talking about normal people. We're talking about men who are priests. We're talking about 2 priests here. They are supposed to be men of God, not to mention are not men who completely ignore the laws and customs that were set up by God. And verse 12 points to the root of the issue. It says, they did not know the Lord, or they had no regard for him. It seems so hard to imagine that the sons of Eli, the chief priest, would be so far removed from God and so depraved. However, this storyline bears a striking resemblance to the sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu. Those two sons of Aaron messed with the sacrificial system and were immediately struck down by God. It seems that Hophni and Phinehas did not learn from their example. Well, considering the statement that they did not know the Lord, I wonder if they even knew about Nadab and Abihu. So in steps their father, Eli. He's been hearing all that his two boys are up to, how they've corrupted the worship there in Shiloh, how they've slept with the women at the tabernacle. Again, it was no secret. And at some point, he decides that they've gone far enough, and he decides to step in and he rebukes them. One problem with Eli's rebuke, however, it seems that he's too late. By the time he steps in, Eli would have been pretty old and had likely grown a little soft in his old age. We would be wise to remember that the tendency to go down the wrong path often manifests itself at a young age. And the text refers to Hophni and Phinehas as young men. When we as humans are allowed to travel the wrong path unchecked for an extended period of time, we tend to become set in our ways. And it can be very difficult to find your way back. A quote I found when I was getting this lesson up says, a small plant can be easily rooted up. But when it becomes a tree, it takes a more extraordinary effort to remove it. Colossians 3 and verse 21 warns that we can be too hard on our young, saying, fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged by too much strictness. Yet so many more become spoiled by too much indulgence. Hophni and Phinehas have evidently been allowed to act this way for quite some time. Verse 25 says that they did not heed the voice of their father because the Lord desired to kill them. Now that statement on the surface can be a little hard to reconcile. The Lord desired to kill them. This indicates that their hearts had been hardened and they were set in their ways, which reminds me of when Moses visited Pharaoh on behalf of the Israelites. In those scenes, the scriptures make mention of God hardening Pharaoh's heart. And the word in the English language makes it sound as if God just supernaturally reached in and turned the Pharaoh's heart to stone, but that's not what happened. God gives everyone free moral agency, and Pharaoh was no exception to this. He doesn't force you or force Pharaoh or anyone else to do anything that is against his will. God does, however, allow for your heart to be hardened should you decide to use that free moral agency in sinful ways. And he has, in the past, used these hardened hearts to further his cause. And this is what's happening with Hophni and Phinehas right now. They've used their free will to act in ways that do not please God for quite a while. And as we read, God intends to cut Eli's house off permanently. But other than the fact that Eli's rebuke was too late, it was ineffective for other reasons. It was not given earnestly enough. He wasn't as pointed in the way he went to them, both collectively and not individually. He presented his objection by way of a question. He asked them, why do you do such things? And he seems a little reactive, as it's only after he hears these things from the people that he confronts his sons about their behavior. And I find it hard to believe that Eli would not have any clue about the things that have been going on in Shiloh. Eli also focuses on the consequences of their sins and not the nature of sin and how it is evil. He tells them that God will judge them, and he asks them, who will intercede for you? Also, he offered no corrective action. He didn't threaten to judge them himself. He just left them subject to God's judgment, which we know he will not hesitate to exercise. A commentator had this to say about Eli's situation. In the case where rebuke should have descended like a bolt from heaven, we hear nothing but the low and feeble murmurings coming, as it were, out of the dust. Cruel indeed are the tenderest mercies of parental weakness and indulgence. And the fate of Eli shows that by such mercies the father may become the minister of vengeance unto his whole house. Therefore, we should be very pointed in our reproofs should we find ourselves in that situation. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, after David causes Uriah to be killed in battle, the prophet Nathan comes to him with a parable about a rich man who owned many flocks and herds, and a poor man that owned a single ewe lamb. The parable says that the poor man loved this ewe lamb very much, and the rich man takes this poor man's lamb and prepares it as a meal for a traveler who's passing through. So when David hears this parable, he becomes enraged, and he says, "This man shall surely die." And Nathan tells David flat out, "You are the man." It's also important that we make abundantly clear that sin is evil. We shouldn't avoid sin simply because we are afraid what is going to happen if we do sin. Avoiding sin leads to glorifying God, and that should be our ultimate goal in this life. Also, we should try to do something to stop the person that is in sin from continuing on in sin. It says here, or we see that Eli didn't do anything. The law of Moses, as harsh as it sounds, says this about rebellious children in Deuteronomy 21, verses 18 through 21. It says, "If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have chastened him, will not heed them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city. And they shall say to the elders of his city, This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall put away the evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear." So far, we've seen the more obvious shortcomings in Eli's reproof of his sons. But there could be one more reason that Hophni and Phinehas did not heed the word of their father. They simply did not respect him. Maybe because Eli likely carries some of the blame himself for the corrupted worship in Shiloh. Obviously, he allowed a lot of this sinfulness to happen right under his nose. But let's take a look back at the text, particularly beginning in verse 29. The man of God included Eli in his accusation when he said, "You make yourselves fat." It seems that Eli was participating in all of this, at least to some extent. Now, there's no mention of him sleeping with the women at the tabernacle, but it sounds like he probably helped himself to some of the extra food that his sons had gathered up. In a few chapters, we'll read about the death of Eli, where it seems to confirm at least the description of the man of God's description of it. In 1 Samuel chapter 4 and verse 18, it says, "Then it happened when he made mention of the ark of God that Eli fell off the seat backwards by the gate, by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for the man was old and heavy." So if Eli was in fact participating in allowing the worship to be corrupted as it was, then he would certainly carry some of the blame. And it's unfortunate that this is the case for a priest, but one of the biggest things that Eli is remembered for is for his lack of control over his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. Now, I realize that everything I've said up to this point paints things in a very negative light. But there is a positive point in this chapter that we're reminded of a few times, that it's not all bad. There's a point in this chapter that's interjected into the middle of all of this that indicates that the future will not look like the present. We're reminded in the middle of all this with Hophni and Phinehas and Eli that Samuel is still there ministering and growing, getting ready to fulfill his role as a man of God. And we will continue to learn more about Samuel, particularly in the next chapter, but that is not part of this lesson.